Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week I had the pleasure of welcoming onto the show Dean Emeritus Dr. Gary Levin. Some of my favorite moments from the show include hearing his career journey from the Navy to choosing pharmacy to spending nearly 30 years in academia, how early investing and saving in his first faculty job laid the foundation for his retirement nearly 30 years later, how he dealt with the market volatility throughout his career to avoid panic and to keep that long-term mindset, and why he decided to start a business, Captain G's Charter Company, in retirement to supplement his income and to help build his retirement paycheck. Now, before we jump into the show, I recognize that many listeners may not be aware of what the team at YFP Planning does in working one-on-one with more than 280 households in 40-plus states. YFP Planning offers fee-only, high-touch financial planning that is customized to the pharmacy professional. And if you're interested in learning more about working one-on-one with a certified financial planner, may help you achieve your financial goals, you can book a free discovery call at yfpplanning.com. Whether or not YFP Planning's financial planning services are a good fit for you, know that we appreciate your support of this podcast and our mission to help pharmacists achieve financial freedom. Okay, let's jump into my interview with Dr. Gary Levin. Gary, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to dig into your pharmacy journey a little bit, how you've planned for retirement and how you've thought about the financial journey throughout your career. And then we'll wrap up and talk about the business that you recently started in retirement as well. And I have a feeling, just based on some back and forth conversation that we had on LinkedIn and email, that you're going to have a lot to share in terms of pearls of wisdom for our listeners, whether it's new practitioners that are listening that are just getting started. Maybe it's some mid-career pharmacists that are feeling like they're in the thick of it as they look ahead towards the future, or perhaps folks that are nearing retirement and are able to gain something from someone who has recently made that transition. So let's start with your career journey. What got you into pharmacy, and where did you end up doing your pharmacy training?
So, interesting story, but I was in the Navy for 7 years, right out of high school. I had just really been done with school. I didn't really like school. So once I graduated, I was just working at local restaurants. I was working as a gas station back when you had an attendant pump your gas. I mean, still New Jersey has that, but it was everywhere. And I grew up in Philadelphia and really just wanted to get out and do something completely different. And my best friend said, "Hey, let's join the Navy on the buddy program." We did. We went to boot camp together, and right after boot camp, we were separated. Mm-hmm. He ended up on a ship out of San Diego, and I ended up as an Airedale. So I actually, in 7 years in the Navy, I never saw a ship except from the air. I flew on a plane that was too big to land on an aircraft carrier. And when I say I flew, I didn't fly the plane. I was back in the middle of the plane. They called us a tube rat, back in the middle of the tube. And I operated the equipment that helped us hunt Soviet submarines. So my job was actually aviation anti-submarine warfare operator. And I liked it so much that I started college during some off time and I was stationed in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay.
So what we would do is we would train for about 10 or 11 months in Jacksonville for the next location that we were going to go to. And then our whole squadron of 11 planes and about 400 people would just move to a new location for 6 months. And then we would operate out of that location. So I really got to talk about enjoying the world. I got to live for 6 months at a time in Sicily, in the Azores, which are Portuguese islands in the North Atlantic, Bermuda, which I was there during the height of vacation season. I was in Bermuda from April to October. So that was not a tough deployment place to be. Okinawa and the Philippines.
Wow.
And Spain. So I really did get to see the world. And from all of those places, at any given time, they would send us to another location. So, for example, when I was in Spain, they said, well, Greece wants to play some war games. So we're going to go try and find their submarines. So we would go to Greece for a week at a time, or we would go to France for a week at a time. So I really did get to see almost everything. While I was in, though, I knew I wanted to go to college. I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, and that was always my plan. So my classes were pre-vet. After 4 years in the Navy, they wanted me to re-enlist, and I had really just started to take classes. And while I was in, at my particular rating, as long as you got an A or a B in your class, they would pay for 90% of the tuition.
Okay.
So I took 2 classes while I was in Jacksonville. At the time, it was Jacksonville Community College. I think now it's Florida College in Jacksonville, Florida State College in Jacksonville. And I took 2 classes and just really loved it. When I re-enlisted, my squadron was going to Keflavik, Iceland for a full winter deployment. And I thought, Iceland is a place where people now go on vacation.
Yeah.
And my wife said, I can't believe that you didn't go to Iceland. And I said, well, when people go on vacation, they go for 2 weeks and they go in the summer.
Yes.
This was 6 months solid winter. I think it was September to March, maybe full winter. I said, no, I've done enough of my sea duty time. I'm ready to go to shore duty. So because they didn't want me to leave the squadron, they wanted me in Keflavik, Iceland. They said, well, the only place we can send you is Memphis. And I said, well, that's fine. I'll use that time to go to college full time. Yeah. So I did go to college full time while I was there, and still doing my pre-vet. I went to Memphis State University, which is now University of Memphis. And anyone who was a former student of mine or interviewed at any of my colleges that I've worked at as a dean probably have heard this story, because I would tell it, before the actual interview day started, what my background was. So I apologize to any of those that have already heard this story. I did get to I finished my sophomore year as a pre-vet, but pre-vet, pre-pharmacy, pre-dental, pre-med, they're all the same. Same courses. I had friends that were going to pharmacy school. And at the time, this was the early and mid 1980s. Most people, really, it was the BS in pharmacy that was the predominant degree. There were only, if you were not in California, there were only about 4 colleges in the country that offered an entry-level PharmD degree. My wife was in pharmacy school about the same time, and she went to University of Kansas, and it wasn't even an option. She had to do her BS, and then she worked for a year and then applied and went back to get her post-bac PharmD. So we didn't know each other at the time. We didn't meet until 15, 20 years later at University of Florida. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go straight through. And because I was already a resident in Florida by being in the Navy there, I went back to Florida to go to University of Florida. And I thought, okay, what do I do? I'm now halfway through my junior year, and I've been pre-vet the whole time. So I went and talked to a health career advisor. And of course, the first thing they say is, what about medical school? Oh, I didn't say why I didn't want to be a vet. I worked for a vet in my last year at Memphis part-time. And if you're not an owner, and nobody can own a practice right out of vet school, you can do residencies if you want to specialize, but they don't pay well. And we had an associate vet, so he wasn't one of the owners. He was just working for them full-time. Now, again, this was 1985. And at that time, pharmacists were making about $35,000 a year. And I said, do you mind me asking, what do you make? And he said $18,000. He paid about $100,000 in tuition. And I said, how long is it going to be for you to pay off your student loans? $18,000, that wasn't much, really more. It was a little bit more than minimum wage. He said his goal was to work there about 5 years build up enough of a clientele that ultimately he can own his own practice. Very similar to what dentists do. And even physicians right out of training oftentimes. So that was really why I decided, vet school wasn't for me. I wasn't going through all these years of college to make, at the time, what was just half of or a third of what a pharmacist could make. I still didn't think pharmacy was for me, though, because a lot of my friends that were in my classes in college were going to pharmacy school, and they were going, at the time, it was the BS degree. And at the time, they would even say, I would say, what is your job going to be? And they would say themselves, well, we take it from the big bottle, count by fives, and put it in the little bottle. And I said, you're going to go to school for 5, 6, 7 years, and that's what your job is going to be for the rest of your career? And they would tell me that there's other things to do, but you have to do advanced training. You typically have to get a PharmD. So at the time, Florida was transitioning so I never even thought of pharmacy school. When I talked to the healthcare advisor at UF, they set me up to meet with a few of the faculty to explain that there were other jobs. It doesn't mean to say that I didn't want to work in the community. Yep. I actually worked in the community many times as a pharmacist in my residency, in my fellowship, as an assistant professor, ultimately when I got to that point. And I really enjoyed working with patients. So med school was out because I didn't want to do another 3 or 4 years of residency. And I said, when I graduate, I just want to graduate and be able to go into practice or training or into my career. And UF was just transitioning from the post-bac PharmD to the entry-level PharmD. We had to make our decision after our first year. So everyone was together in one class. And after our first year, we had to decide, okay, are you going to go into the PharmD track or the BS track? And it was in my year, about 40 students went into the PharmD track and about 60 went into the BS. Interestingly enough, probably half of those people that went into the BS track ended up doing the program that Florida had, which was the working professional PharmD program.
Yep.
Because they wanted to do something different or just advance their career beyond a chain or a independent pharmacy. They wanted to move up, even if they wanted to stay with the chain, they wanted to move up into administration. They wanted to do something different. So I went the PharmD track. And really my goal was still at that point to get my PharmD and to work as a pharmacist, not to do any postdoctoral training.
Yep.
A friend of mine was working for an independent in Tampa called, I won't mention names. It was an independent in Tampa that had 3 different pharmacies. And he had contacted me and said, I would like to hire you. I don't have any PharmDs at the time, but I would really like to promote the fact that you can work with patient counseling, that you could do things beyond what are behind the counter pharmacists are doing. And we're going to promote that we have a doctor of pharmacy. You would be probably one of the few in Tampa at the time. Again, because most of the people that did the post-bac program, a number of them are my friends now, went into hospital pharmacy or they went into industry. So very few were doing community pharmacy. So it sounded great. After I graduated, I went to do that and nothing was any different. I was doing the exact same job as all the quote retail pharmacists, and I was working behind the counter, not doing anything different. So I did that for about 6 months and I left to go to the VA in Tampa. While working at the VA, a number of my friends and colleagues, and by the way, I always encourage people to join, either be active in your student pharmacy organizations. For me, I was most active in Kappa Psi, and that has really helped me throughout my career. So a close friend of mine, who probably many people, at least in the Florida area, know, Doug Covey, was working as a clinical specialist at the VA in Tampa. And I said, Doug, I want to do what you do. I want to be a clinical specialist, not just working in the pharmacy. And the VA had said, we want to do an experiment. We have clinical specialists who are PharmDs that have either been a PharmD for a long period of time and have either done a residency, or if they haven't done a residency, they've been a PharmD for a while and they've built up trust with the clinicians that they work with. But at your level, you're going to be in the middle. So I did get to work I got to work with him in a cardiology clinic, in the Coumadin clinic, and in a refill clinic. So people that ran out of their medication, but they couldn't get an appointment with a physician for probably 3 months. So they would meet with us. It was me and 3 other PharmDs from my class. And we would actually review their chart, make sure that everything was stabilized so that we can actually write a prescription for them. This was before pharmacists actually wrote prescriptions in the VA. So what we wrote was a recommendation, and the physician had, I think, about 72 hours to review it and say that he agreed with it. So in all sense, we were writing prescriptions. And this was in 1986 timeframe. I'm sorry. I'm thinking before I went to pharmacy. This was in 1990. So I really enjoyed doing that, but it was really only 1 day a week. And then a half day a week working in the cardiology clinic with Doug, and a half day a week doing the Coumadin clinic. But I wanted to do that full time. And his best advice was, Gary, you really need to go back and do a residency. So the 2 things that I enjoyed the most in pharmacy school, at least through my rotations, actually 3. One was emergency medicine and toxicology. And a friend of mine who many people know in Florida and around the country is Joe Spillane. Joe was a year ahead of me in doing a 2-year program in Jacksonville. So it was considered a 2-year fellowship. Another was ambulatory care. That was with John Gums at the University of Florida. And again, it was a 2-year fellowship. And probably my favorite thing was psychiatry. Now, psychiatry was a 1-year residency at the VA in Gainesville. I got along amazingly with the preceptor. I got to know him during my rotation. And they basically, this was before, if you did a specialty residency, you didn't have to apply for a PGY2. This was before the time of PGY1s and PGY2s. And PharmDs could either do either a general clinical residency, which was pretty much what a PGY1 is now, or a specialty residency, what a PGY2 is now. But you could go into it right after your PharmD degree. So I wasn't prepared to make a 2-year commitment. So I did the 1-year residency in psychiatry or psychiatric pharmacy practice. Now, of course, actually, it was probably 1994, became the specialty board certified psychiatric pharmacy. And I was in the first group of people to do that. And I've maintained it ever since. I've recertified 4 times, the most recent being for 2022. 3 times I did it by exam. The last time, because I was so far out of practice, and I really wanted to do it just to keep my specialty because I was the founding president of the College of Psychiatric and Neurologic Pharmacy, which this year will become known as the American Association of Pharmacy Practitioners, I think, AAPP.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that transition was happening. Okay.
So this year is the transition year. So anything that you see about them, it'll say CPNP/AAPP.
Yeah. Okay.
So because of that, and because of still being known with them and associated with them, I've gone to every meeting, I think, since they started in 1992, and I helped found that original meeting. I kept my board certification, so this will definitely be my last one. Uh, that's a long background, but that's how I got into psych. And when I first started, my residency preceptor asked me, "Okay, do you want to do a fellowship?" And his name is Lindsay Devon. He is the editor. He's retired, but he's the editor now of the journal Pharmacotherapy. He's been the editor in chief for probably about 5 years, 6 years, and he still has some practice with research at Medical University of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So he asked me that my first day in, and I said, I really want to practice as a clinical psychiatric pharmacist. After about 3 months with him, I realized that I wanted to do what he did, which was academic pharmacy, have a clinical practice, have a research practice, and an academic practice and teach. So 3 months in, well, when I said I didn't know yet, he said, well, you do need to decide by your third month, because if you want to do a fellowship, we need to start applying for grants now.
Mm-hmm.
And so at 3 months we did. But I said, Lindsay, but I don't want to do a 2-year fellowship. I want to do a 1-year fellowship. And he said, that's fine if you're willing to do fellowship work as a resident. So it's going to be a busy year, but you're going to be a resident, but you're going to be laying the foundation for the fellowship basically by writing grants. And I said, I'm fine with that. So that I ended up doing a residency and fellowship, which is total 2 years postdoc at University of Florida and with the VA in Gainesville, Florida. And really that was it. That's what took off as my academic career. At that point, I'd been in Florida, I think a total of 11 years between being in Gainesville, in the Navy. Well, more than that, because you count my Navy time, UF time, I was ready for a complete change. So I applied for a number of positions, but ended up as my first academic position at Albany College of Pharmacy, which I think now is Albany College of the Health Sciences.
Yep.
And I was there for 7 years. And then I won't go through my whole academic history, but my mentor left to go to MUSC, and the department chair at the time, Larry Lopez, called me and asked if I had any interest in coming back to University of Florida. I was already an associate professor, so I'd made that first academic step, and ultimately I did go back to University of Florida as an associate professor, and really, that's my career from there.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And most recently, you were the founding dean at Larkin University down in Miami. And since you made that transition into retirement, I want to talk a little bit about that transition and some of the planning that you did leading up to that. And I think for many pharmacists in the first, let's just say, decade of their career that I talked to, for good reasons, they're feeling overwhelmed with over 6 figures of student loan debt.
Sure.
Average right now is about $170,000. Obviously, we're dealing with high inflation right now, a pretty crazy housing market, uncertainty and volatility with the stock markets, and all that to say, I think the idea of saving for retirement and getting to that point of I've made it, and we can talk about what that means, can feel overwhelming, and to some, it probably just feels out of touch. It's so
Absolutely.
far away. It feels so big, so scary. And am I really going to get there? And what planning do I need to do? And so my question for you, as we get into a little bit of your strategy of preparing and getting to the point of being able to be in a financial position to retire, at what point in your career did you start thinking, I need to start planning and saving for retirement? Was that something that you were doing all along? Was there a mentor or a guide that you had? But at what point were you beginning to think, hey, I've got to really be planning for the future?
I think I was very fortunate in my first academic position, Albany College of Pharmacy, because people there had a mindset of preparing for retirement. And it was actually the only place that I've ever worked at that, I mean, Albany College of Pharmacy was the fourth college of pharmacy in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been around since the 1800s. um, and therefore, I mean, they, have for just being a college of pharmacy, as opposed to a large university with many colleges, I think they are very, very well endowed because they have hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but well over 100 years of alumni. Now, many of those alumni have passed away, but they've had alumni for many, many years. One of my favorite things to do when I had a break was to walk through the administrative wing, and they had pictures like most colleges do of their, somewhere near the dean's office is the big picture, of all the graduates in a composite picture.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite things to do was to go and look at the founding, well, all the classes, but look how the styles changed of coats and ties and the number of women that came into
demographics.
the demographics of the program. But they had pictures going back to the first class, which I don't remember the exact year, but it was somewhere in the 1880s. And looking at what that class was like, and, it was maybe 18 students, all male for like 30 years. And then you see the first female.
Yeah.
But because they had this large endowment, they were really able to have a great benefits package. And their benefits package for all employees, faculty or staff or anybody, was that they gave you a 10% not match, but they just gave you 10% of your salary every year into your retirement fund, which was TIAA CREF, which is the majority of colleges, universities, and I think hospitals probably have TIAA CREF as an option. It was their only option. And it's been at least one or the only option at most of the colleges I've worked for. I think I worked for 7 colleges or pharmacy or universities. So they just put in 10% right off the bat. I've never heard of that. When I was at University of Florida, they had a 10% match, but of course it was a match. If you put in 2%, they put in 2%, but they'd go up to 10. So the fact that Albany right off the bat gave you 10%, the first year that I was there, I was concerned about student loans. My wife had student loans. Actually, I take that back. She didn't have student loans. She had a different profession before pharmacy, so she was able to pay for her pharmacy degree all the way through. So it was really just me. Now, I ended with about close to $30,000 of student loans, and you're probably better at this than me, but $30,000 in 1990.
Just thinking that, yeah.
And then for 2 years, I didn't pay back for my residency and fellowship, and interest accumulates.
Yeah.
And interest at that time, most people probably don't remember, but in the 80s, I know housing interest went as high, housing to buy a house. So I bought a house when I moved to Gainesville in 1986, and my mortgage interest was 12%.
Yeah.
And that was an owner financed, because they did a lot, and they said if you go to the bank, it'll probably be 14 or 15%.
That's right.
So people right now that are faced with 5%,
5-6% looks good,
5,
right?
6, and I think last week it actually dropped a little bit when the Fed raised 3 or 3/4 of a point. Rates dropped below 5, and people should jump on that. Because we're probably never going to see 2.5 or 3% again.
And that's something I talked about in a recent show. I graduated in 2008, as our listeners know. And, we've been spoiled, for those that are in or since that time period. We've been spoiled with extremely low historical interest rates. And so I think we've been accustomed to, like, this is just the way it is, 0% car financing, 3%, 2.8%, 30-year, fixed rate mortgages on homes. Student loan interest rates, especially for those that need to refinance on the private side, really low. And that's not what it's always been. And I
Right.
think, I've talked to my parents about this and other guests as well. There certainly have been time periods of higher inflation, and will we see those lower, rates again or not?
Right.
We'll see in the future. But it's interesting you mentioned how impactful that early contribution from Albany, them providing 10%. Even when you got
Right.
to Florida, the 10% match. I mean, outside of academic institutions, those are unheard of,
Right.
today for many of our pharmacists, especially that work out in the private sector. So they're going to have to work a little bit harder on their own. You're not going to see 8, 10% matches, and you're certainly
Right.
not going to see a whole lot of contributions being made without a match. My question for you, and I think one that probably a lot of listeners are struggling with in the moment, is dealing with the current volatility. And especially for those that have not been through this. I go back to my experience, 2008, just graduated. I was doing residency, at the time making a whopping $31,000. I didn't own a home. So outside of gas being expensive, like I didn't feel that recession. And if
Right.
anything, I was able to start my investing career buying low and really saw the upside of that for, almost 14 years until we had the recent dip. And even the dip in the pandemic, back to March 2020, it was so short lived. I'm not sure we saw the impact like a 2008 recession or others
Right.
before, where, maybe we have people that have now been 10 to 15 years into their career, have never dealt with this kind of volatility. Maybe they've accrued, three, four, five, $600,000. And this is the first time they're looking at it saying, yeesh, like I just lost, 30 to 40% of my
Right.
portfolio. And this is the first test, I think, for many of like, am I really in it for the long term, and making sure I don't make any, decisions in the short term that are going to hurt me. So what advice would you have for folks that are, especially on that first half of their career, that are experiencing this volatility, that are questioning their investment strategy, and are maybe even wondering like, is it worth it when there's other competing expenses where I could be putting these dollars? You've lived through some of these cycles and
Yeah.
obviously weathered them. So tell us your thoughts on that.
So my first recommendation would be to never panic.
Mm,
So many people took money or took their money that they had invested in, especially the 2008,
yeah.
which was the biggest, 2007 leading up to that, right?
Hmm.
Um, so many people took their money and just put it into cash or um, uh, money market, which
Yeah.
probably pays 1%, or you can move it into annuity, which pays 2 or 3%. But me and my wife, we looked at it as, wow, this is an excellent opportunity to buy low because
Yeah.
we're continuing to put in every paycheck. So we're buying as low as possible. And anybody that follows the stock market, and if they don't, then I encourage that everybody have a financial planner. As a department chair, I've been a department chair twice and a dean twice. And in both of those positions, I saw myself not just as an employee mentor, but as a life mentor as
Yeah.
much as I could be. Because I went through I have one son, he's 27 now, but I went through, having a child or a baby while I was in academia,
Hmm.
um, changing jobs, spouse changing jobs, all the sorts of things,
Yeah.
buying houses, all the sorts of things that they're going through or going to go through. And I encourage them to start putting money away as early as they can. I have had, and here's the part where I would never name names, but I have had faculty, many of them, say to me, I've been told by my financial planner or advised to pay off my student loans first before I put money away. And I personally disagree with that because you will get your student loans paid off long before you retire. But I don't know, but compounded interest, if you put $100 a month away at age, let's say 25, at age 65 or 70, that $100, if you go by the general rule, and the general rule is every 7 years your money doubles.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
that includes ups and downs in the markets that every
Hmm.
7 years. If you have a longer period of no downs, and there's definitely more ups than downs, that $100, I mean, I don't know how many sevens that is, but that $100 is probably several thousand. And if you're doing that once a month,
Yeah.
you, I mean, you're talking about getting into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
And it's not uncommon for people that do that to retire with well over $1 million.
That's right.
And
That's right.
a lot of pharmacists are married to pharmacists. And if they're not married to pharmacists, they're often married to other people doing very well in the healthcare, like nurses, physicians, nutritionists, any sort of other healthcare practitioner that's making 60,000 and up. And these are people where both of them could be putting away. So the way I started when I had that 10%, I realized that it was 10% of not much. And I didn't know that pharmacy salaries, as a faculty member, I started at 48,000. I didn't know that that would go to well over 100,000. So I looked at it as it's 10% of not very much, but it's $4,800 a month going in. So the first year, we focused on buying a house. We really decided, okay, we're not going to put anything away, but I plan that every year I'm probably going to get a raise. And that's another benefit of Albany College of Pharmacy. We had good raises. Many people that work for state universities, they might not get a raise like privates will get. Private universities will typically look at what is the consumer inflation index. And the average, I mean, I realize this year is not a normal year, but the average is around 2%. And what they'll do is most private universities will take that 2% and add 2% to that. And they'll say our average raise this year is going to be 4%. And depending on merit, it's going to vary between, the very worst person is going to get 2% and the highest might get 6%.
Yeah.
So at Albany, I typically ranged between 4 and 6%. And 2 years in a row, I got the highest raise in the university. That's great, but not normal. And it wasn't that way my entire career, but it was 2 great years. So my goal was always whatever my raise was, if my raise was 4%, 2% I was going to enjoy in my salary, and 2% I was going to put into the match. And I did that every year so that by the time I left Albany after 7 years, I was matching that 10% that they were putting in. Again, that was 10% of a relatively low number, even though I was there 7 years with some great pay raises. When I left there, I was making, I think it was 67. And then I went to University of Florida as a associate professor in 1999 and started at 75.
Yep.
Pharmacists coming out were making more than that. They were making about 80. So it was not until I became vice chair for the department at University of Florida and the stipend that I got for being vice chair. So at that point, about 9 years in academia, vice chair for the department, and I'm finally making as much as one of our graduates.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think there's so much wisdom in what you shared of the habit that then has a compound effect. So, you mentioned your example of 4% ish, maybe a little bit higher, at Albany. And so taking a portion of that and building the behavior of I'm going to save it and invest it. And because salaries go up, if you've built that behavior based on a percentage, that not only is that number going to go up, but then the compound effect of that number is going to go up even more over time. So I think that's a really good strategy. And I've been recording some of the lessons that you're sharing here, and I've got 4 so far. Number 1, we talk about don't panic. So we're going to experience volatile periods of the market as we are right now. Number 2 is
I guess with don't panic, try not to look every day.
That's right.
If you're invested.
Be informed, but not in it so much that you're panicking.
Because you're not in it for day to day. You're in this for 20 or 30 years from now. And there will be ups and there will be downs. But no matter what, if you look at the market from the date they started recording, it goes like that.
Yep, that's right.
It's a mountain slope.
So number 1, don't panic. Number 2 is the value of having a good coach, a trusted advisor and planner. And I think that relates to number 1 because a good coach and a planner is going to talk you through some of the volatile time periods to make sure we're looking long term. Number 3, you mentioned start as early as possible, and you gave some good examples and numbers of, what is $100 a month equal over time. And then number 4, we just talked about this concept of save the raise is what I call it. So if we get raises over time, if we can build the discipline to put away a portion of that, that's going to have a huge impact over time. My last financial question before we transition and wrap up by talking a little bit about what you're doing on the business side of retirement is that, saving for retirement is one thing. We talk a lot about building a nest egg. We talk a lot about how much might someone need. Is it $1 or $2 or $3 million? But building a retirement paycheck and determining how you're going to actually withdraw that money and the strategy for doing that is a completely different thing. And we don't talk as much about that, I think, in the financial services world. We talk about the accrual phase a lot, but we don't talk as much about the withdrawal strategy. And this is really where a lot can happen in terms of mistakes made or opportunities, if we can optimize this phase. So can you share, especially for those listening that are, getting ready or see on the horizon that retirement phase, what your strategy has been thus far or what you're planning to do for withdrawing these various funds that you've accrued throughout your career as you begin to build that retirement paycheck?
So I try to take out as little as possible. I'm very fortunate in that my wife is younger than me, and she will probably work about 5 to 6 more years before retiring from J&J. So she has a very healthy income too. That allowed me to retire and really not have to touch any of my funds.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'll try and make it for anybody that still has either a spouse retiring or you both retired at the same time. Social Security, we have to mention that.
Yep.
Right now, they say, I think that there's about 30 years left. This is just something I believe as a core in my heart that Social Security will not go away. I mean, it's a promise
I agree with you.
that the government has made since FDR was president when it started.
It would be catastrophic if it does.
And I believe it would lead to something like a civil war, much, much worse than the January 6th insurrection, because you're affecting tens of millions of people, not, a couple 100,000 that are upset, tens of millions of people, and that have been putting away. When Obama was president and they first started to talk about there being, potentially an end or a lifetime of Social Security, that it has to come to an end. Well, if it has to come to an end, you have to stop taking from people Social Security and say, take this money and invest it on your own. But we can't continue to take it and make money off of you and then say it's gone. And it's not, for those that don't know, it's 7.5%, I think, or 7.55%. And your employer pays 7.55%. Right. If you're self-employed, it's double that. So you're paying the entire 15% yourself. So that's a lot of money to take from somebody for 40, 50 years and then say, we're not going to give you anything. So even the people that are billionaires, they took that money from them. I think they owe them something in return. Now, I do believe that they can move to a sliding scale.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. People that are billionaires probably don't need to get $2,000 a month. So I'm very supportive of a sliding scale, but that sliding scale should not be the number that I've heard talked about, like $200,000 or $220,000, because two pharmacists could be making over $220,000 that are partners. Maybe not after they retire, but they might have more than that, a lot more than that in their retirement funds. So, because people that we all live, and I have this is just the rule of Gary. Everybody lives to about 0.5% or 1% beyond their means. If we didn't, we would have no need for credit cards, lines of credit. We all tend to live at our means, but just a tiny bit over that we're always comfortable. So we shouldn't have to change that because Social Security, goes away. So I don't think that's not a promise. That's just my opinion. It'll never go away. It may change, but I don't think it'll ever go away. That would lead to, I believe, something as big as a civil war, that catastrophic. My generation, so I'm one of the last few years, I'm a baby boomer, but I'm the last few years. I was born in 1960. So I was eligible to start Social Security at 62. Every year that you wait in not taking it, that goes up 8%. Mm-hmm. So if I took it at 63, it would be 8% more than when I was 62. I'm not. If I wait till 64, it's another 8%. When we look at market volatility over time, we consider 8% per year over, say, a 10 or 15 year period, a good or average years. 6% if you want to be conservative, 8% if you want to meet what the S&P has generally done over time, and 10% if you want to say, well, I feel like I'm retiring or the next 10 years should be pretty good. So I have not started taking my Social Security because there's nothing in life that's guaranteed, right, other than death and taxes. And this is something that's guaranteed. So there are three things, is that every year you don't take your Social Security, it goes up 8%. Mm-hmm. So my goal is to not take it at least until my wife retires. And if that's in 5 years, I'll be 67. And that would have gone up 5 times 8, 40%. So right now, my retirement check would look somewhere around, I think, $2,200. And I think it would be $3,000 or over at 67.
Let's shift gears here and wrap up with the work that you are doing in your own business. So you're retired from pharmacy, still working though, not as a pharmacist, but have decided to start your own company. So tell us about Captain G's, what the business is all about, and what you're working on.
Great. I still want to mention that I'm still licensed. I don't know why I'm still licensed as a pharmacist. It's just something we worked so long on and have for so long. I don't know if it's a safety net, I think most places would rather hire someone that has a lot of a career left than somebody like me. But if I had to do per diem, I certainly would. I always said that I'd work behind a counter before I would live under a bridge. But I wouldn't be behind the counter. Like I said, I'd be out there helping patients, and hope all the pharmacists that are listening to this do that. Or counseling or anything else that you would consider helping their quality of life. So I retired about a year and a half ago, and I really never planned to do this. Actually, I had planned to do it, and that was creating a charter service with my boat. So we had a larger boat. We had a 45-foot boat when I retired with a fly bridge, which is a pretty big boat. 3 staterooms, 2 heads or bathrooms on it, a full galley, an outdoor kitchen and grill. And I probably could have lived on that boat. And we tried it. We actually, when we lived in Coconut Grove, which is a very popular area in Miami, we did Airbnb for 1 week a month for our house and lived on the boat to see if we enjoyed living on a boat. Because that was always my goal, to try and get my wife to say, let's not have a mortgage on the house and a boat. Let's just get a big boat big enough to live on. And it probably would have been like a 60-foot boat. Mm-hmm. That experience, though, she said, I can't live on a boat. I just can't do it. Too small of a space, not enough closet space, etc. Yeah. And not a bathtub. My wife loves a bathtub, not a shower. Mm-hmm. So, but we still owed a couple $100,000 on that boat when I wanted to retire. And she said, look, we've got a lot of equity in this boat. Why don't you sell it? And it was right around the time that quarantine had ended and people wanted to get out, and the boating market and the housing market, that's when they both really started to skyrocket. And boats were selling literally in a day, just like houses. So I hired a broker. We had literally 3 cash offers. We had 3 cash offers before COVID, and then the pandemic hit and it cooled down. The same people that had an offer on the boat when the quarantine ended came back and said, we'll buy it. they tried to offer us a lower amount. And I said, no, we have two other cash offers for one day. No survey. We've already done all this with you, a marine survey. Take it as it is. And they did. And then I ended up with about $250,000 in equity.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife said, that was the original plan, was take what you get in equity and, just buy a boat outright. So I did that. I looked around for a while and found an amazing boat that if anybody's interested in a boat, buy a used one and typically look at 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Boats depreciate at 20% the first year, like a car, 12% the second year, and 8% the third year. After that, they kind of plateau and depreciate about 2 to 3% a year. So really, 40% of depreciation is in the first 3 years, and it hasn't been used that much. We were fortunate to find one that only had 100 hours on the engine.
Wow.
2 staterooms in it, full galley. We went to 1 bathroom, but a separate shower. And I had thought about chartering it, but I didn't want to put all those hours on it. So I talked to a couple charter companies, and they said, when we do charters, it's really about the people being in the water. You're not really taking them on a tour of Miami and the Keys. And you're not cruising at 30 knots or 30 miles an hour, which uses a gallon pretty much every mile. You're burning about a gallon, which is a lot of money. I mean, when we go to Bimini or the Keys, it costs about 60 gallons to get there. And while marine fuel is less expensive, especially marine diesel, it's still about $4 a gallon. It's a lot of money to get to Bimini and back. So that's what I was thinking, is that's a lot of fuel. That's a lot of hours. That means more maintenance I'm going to be paying on the boat, everything. So in talking to a couple of charter companies, I realized that the ideal charter is 4 hours in length. It's basically an hour of cruising around, and you're cruising relatively slow, 8 to 10 knots, which burns maybe 1 gallon during that time period. So, maybe 1.5 gallons. So that was about $6 of fuel during that first hour, showing them around. And then typically they want to anchor and go out in the water and swim. So we let them do that. They typically play in the water for 2 hours, and then it's about an hour to get back. So it doesn't put a lot of time. Each charter puts about 2 hours of engine time on my boat. But the amount of money that people pay for a charter for a boat my size is great. Now,
makes sense. They don't want to own it. They want to enjoy it.
They just want to enjoy it. And so so my company is Captain G's. If you want to look, it's www.captaings, all lowercase, www.captain.gs, G for Gary, S for Captain G's, .net.
Mm-hmm. We'll link to that in the show notes so people can see that. Yep.
And if you see anywhere on that page, I also do a second job. And that's because I've had a number of people call me and say, I just went up from a single engine to a double engine, or I've moved to a boat that has an air conditioner or a generator, or I've went from gas to diesel. There's just a lot of new things that I don't know how to manage.
Yeah.
And I've owned everything from an 18-foot to a 45-foot all over 30 years. I started with an 18-foot bow rider right out of my fellowship, and I've owned a boat ever since. I'm on my 11th boat. This will be my last boat. No sense in getting a bigger boat because I like the number of people that I take out on the charter. Maximum is 8 people, and average is going to be typically anywhere from 2 to 6. My first 3 charters, 2 were last weekend, 2 were 2 weekends ago, and 1 was this past weekend, and we're in low season. They said I'll probably get 5 to 7 a month in low season. And then in November, we pick up into high season, and they said I'll probably get around 11 to 15.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of work for me. I don't want to do all that work. I want to enjoy the income that it brings, and I like getting out on the water. So my goal is to do about 4 charters a month.
Okay.
I did 1 so far. I was on a vacation to Asheville, so I have a backup, Captain Natasha, and she's relatively young, but extremely experienced, and she captains boats up to 75 feet.
Okay.
So she
Okay.
does, handling mine is like me playing with a tinker
Yeah.
toy.
Yeah.
um, she doesn't even hire a mate when she does mine. When she charters 75-foot boats, she'll have a mate with her too to help getting the drinks, helping with the water toys, all that. So I had my first one where I captained it on just this past Saturday for 4 hours. And because we were coming back at night, I had my wife with me because Miami can be pretty busy even at night. So she just helped as a lookout and helped me dock back in. So she
Okay.
served as the first mate. We bought a pair of walkie-talkies so we could seem very professional. She had it in her ear. It looked pretty cool. And it was great. It was just a couple, and we dropped them off at a restaurant when we were done. So if it makes enough money to pay for my slips are not expensive, are not cheap, especially in Miami. And I have a type of slip where it's called a full service marina. You can get fuel there. They do minor repairs for free. Major repairs, they'll bring somebody in, but I haven't had any major, knock on wood. Minor things they'll do for free. If it's anything that a charter customer did, like let's say they put a hole in a seat, then the company that I work with or partner with, which is called theadvantaged.com. So it's www.theadvantaged with a D on the end, .com. So if you click anywhere on my website to do a charter, it'll go directly to my boat on their website. And the reason for that is I don't want to deal with the clientele. I don't want to deal with people saying, hey, I want it for $200 less. I want this. I want that. I want another company to do that. Yeah. So the Advantage does that. Do they make a fee? Yeah, they make 50% after the captain is paid, which is either me or Natasha. But we get the tip 100%, which is typically 20% of the full charter price. And we each split 50% of it at the end. So it's, very good. I probably figure that I will need a service more often than once a year, maybe once every 8 or 9 months, especially once we get into season. The service costs about $4,000. So I do expect that I'll have additional expenses, but things that I was paying for already, like my slip is $12.95 a month. So that fuel, these are things that I'm paying for already, regular upkeep.
That's right. Yeah.
All this can be written off now as an expense of the company. So I hired a company called Zen Business, which is an ideal company for people that want to start small businesses and don't want to do all the paperwork themselves. So they've handled my Florida S Corp, creating an S corporation. They've handled getting my EIN number, which is basically the social security number of a business for federal purposes and taxes. They've handled everything for me. The Advantage handles everything with the clients. They actually even take the money. I deal with nothing unless somebody hands me a cash tip. And it's been great. I mean, I like to get out on the water. Like I said, I don't want to be out there every day of the month or even every other day because I want my time to go out with me and my wife and our friends also. We take friends out probably once every other weekend. But again, I'll do it about 4 times and Natasha can do the rest or our second backup.
And I love that. I mean, you're kind of already building the system of the beginnings, at least of the business, and having other people involved, doing what you want to enjoy, but not, taking up so much time. And I think that fits in so well to that 5th lesson we were talking about, minimizing withdrawal, because obviously there's an opportunity there for additional income that can further allow that delay of Social Security.
Exactly. So we were, without me starting Social Security, I was having to take out about $20,000 a year.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll have to take out anything, which again, just lets it continue to build.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
I only wish that I had additional money to put in during this low time.
I know.
I don't. If it
Yeah.
gets big enough, I will continue to put money in.
Yeah.
But because my wife's still working, she's still putting in
Contributing at the low.
at the low amount, knowing that it's going to grow.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your time and sharing some of your journey here with our listeners, and especially for those folks that are looking ahead and thinking about the journey over the course of the career. I think this will be really insightful. So, thank you, Gary, for taking time to come on the show. I
Tim,
appreciate it.
if there's one biggest thing that I can say, especially for those that have student loans, by all means, don't forget your student loans. But take something, even if it's $100 a month, $50 a month, $10 a week, anything, just start it. Make it as an auto withdrawal so you don't even notice it. And remember, when you take it out of your paycheck to put into retirement, you're typically going to do it where you're not going to pay taxes on that amount.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take out $100 a month, it's only going to look like you've taken out $70 a month. Now, there's a whole other option that you can do where you do it after taxes and put it in as an IRA. And that's probably a whole nother session for Tim to talk about. That wasn't an option when I started my career. That only started about 7 years ago. If it was, I would have done that because I'm going to be taxed on everything that I take out. Yeah. Whereas if you do this relatively new option, yes, you're going to pay taxes now, but not when you need it in retirement.
That's right. That's right. And many folks now have access to a Roth, not just the Roth IRA, but also a Roth 401k.
Right,
or Roth
right. So if you do a whole show on that, please let me know. I'd love to listen in on it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Gary. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, listeners.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.